If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be sitting in my sunroom sipping lukewarm coffee and telling strangers on the internet about what happened with my husband's driver, I would have laughed, and rolled my eyes the way I used to do when my sister would go on about how life blooms in unexpected seasons. But now I know. Better, my name is Elaine, I'm 62, and I've been married to Richard for, well, long enough that we stopped counting anniversaries and started measuring time and vacations missed. And grandchildren born. We're comfortable financially. Emotionally? Socially? Maybe too comfortable. Richard has always been. Successful. Maybe a little too focused on work and retirement. He's just replaced boardrooms with golf courses. But he's still not home much. That's where Jerome came in, our driver, a practical hire, more than anything else after Richard had knee surgery. 2 years ago, it just made sense to have someone on standby. Jerome's been driving for us for a little over a year, mid-40s, quiet, never oversteps. He's got this way about him. Polite, but not stiff, with a kind of old-school dignity. Not the kind you see much, anymore the kind that makes you feel seen without feeling watched. Our interactions were always the same. He'd open the car door. I'd nod politely. And we drive in silence or polite small talk. Nothing remarkable until that afternoon in late October. The air was that kind of cool that sneaks into your sweater sleeves. I remember because I had just stepped out of the salon one of those days where you feel just a little lighter, a little younger because someone else fussed over your hair. I saw the car idling by the curb and Jerome standing outside, leaning slightly, one hand in his pocket. "Mrs. Wallace?" he said, smiling as he opened the door. I smiled back. "Elaine, call me. Elaine, please, I feel older every time. Someone calls me Mrs. Anything." He chuckled softly and nodded. "Elaine, it was nothing, just a moment, but..." Something shifted like a curtain stirred by. A breeze you didn't know was there. We started talking more after that, not in a flirtatious way. At least not that I could tell, just conversations that had if he asked questions about books, about music, about the kind of stuff Richard never bothered with anymore. And I found myself answering, honestly, sometimes too honestly. A few weeks later, on the way back from the market, I was tired, one of those bone-deep tyrants that has nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with feeling invisible. "Jerome must have noticed you, all right, Elaine?" he asked, eyes still on. "The road," I sighed, staring up the window at the golden leaves tumbling down. "Just a long day." He nodded. "You carry it well." I looked at him carry what he glanced at, me in the rear view mirror. Just for a second, everything that stuck with me, it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, like he saw me, like he'd been watching, not to judge, but to understand. After that, things didn't change dramatically, but I became more aware of myself, of him, of how rare it is to feel known. One afternoon a few weeks before Thanksgiving, Richard called to say he'd be flying out to a conference. One of those last-minute things he always justified with just one more trip. Wasn't surprised I was used to it, but it stung anyway. Jerome pulled up for our usual run to the museum board meeting I attend once a month. I slid into the back seat and, without thinking, sighed harder than a meant to rough day husked my husband's skipping. "Thanksgiving?" I said before. I could stop myself, then aloft, trying to make light of it. "He says he'll be back in time for dessert." Jerome didn't laugh, he just nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to heart. That holidays should be about being present." There was that word again, present. We didn't say much for the rest of the ride, but when I got out of the car, he handed me a small paper bag. "Try this," he said, "made it last night. Sweet potato pie, family recipe." I blinked. "Jerome, I can't take just a slice." He interrupted gently, "You can tell me if it's any good next time." The pie was more than good. It tasted like childhood and comfort and home. I found myself thinking about that pie the next morning when I saw him again. This time picking me up for a fundraiser. I told him it was better than any pie I'd ever had, including my mother's. He smiled but said nothing. But he looked at me, really looked at me. The car became our place, our sanctuary of unspoken things. Words mattered less than silences. Then came the evening. I won't forget. It was the Tuesday. Before Thanksgiving, a light drizzle kissed the windshield as we drove back from the charity dinner. My heels pinched, my earrings were too heavy, and I felt every minute of my 62 years. Jerome reached over, turned on the seat warmer, and said he looked beautiful tonight. It wasn't what he said it was, that he said it quietly. Like it wasn't meant to flatter, but to affirm something he already knew to be true. I looked at him. Thank you. We pulled into the driveway, the lights from the house glowing soft through them. I didn't move to get out. He turned to face me. Are you okay, Elaine? I don't know. I said. We sat in the stillness. I could hear the soft tick of the engine, the distant hoot of an owl in the trees. Then he reached over slowly, gently, and placed his hand over mine. Just for a moment, warmth bloomed up my arm, through my chest, and straight into a part of me I thought had gone quiet. Long ago, there was no kiss, no dramatic music, just that hand, that moment, and it changed everything. I didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't guilt exactly. It wasn't even confusion. It was something else, like my soul had been gently nudged awake after a long slumber, and it didn't quite know what to do with itself. Richard didn't call. Not that I expected him to. He was in Phoenix or Dallas, or one of those cities he never bothers to describe anymore. Just names in his itinerary, not stories, not memories. The morning was overcast, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. I wandered into the kitchen, still in my robe, poured my coffee, and stood. By the window, the bird feeder was empty again. I made a mental note to refill it. Even though I knew I wouldn't not today, Jerome's hand over mine, it lingered in my memory, like a scent knot overpowering just. Present, I told myself. It was nothing, a comforting gesture, kindness. The sort of thing that would have gone unnoticed if it hadn't landed exactly where I'd been most alone. But all day I kept catching myself smiling at nothing, and that scared me a little. I didn't see Jerome again until Friday. I could have asked him to take me to the store or the library or just about anywhere to force a conversation. But I didn't. I needed the space to think, to let the moment breathe. When he arrived that afternoon to drive me to the florist, everything felt quieter. Not awkward, not strained, just cautious, like we were both walking barefoot across new ground. Elaine, he greeted, holding the door for him. Hi, I said. Climbing in, we didn't speak for the first few minutes, just the soft hum of the engine and the rain tapping gently on the roof. Finally he said, I hope I didn't cross a line the other night. His voice was low, steady. I looked over at him. You didn't. He nodded once. Good. That was it. No long explanations, no apologies. And I appreciated that more than I can explain. Because the truth is, I didn't want it explained. I didn't want it analyzed or dissected. I just wanted it to be real. At the florist, I took longer than necessary, ran my fingers over rose petals and eucalyptus stems, like I was searching for something more than a centerpiece. When we got back in the car, Jerome opened my door again. But this time, his fingers brushed my wrist just lightly. I noticed, so did he. I could have said something then about Richard, about how none of this made sense, but instead I asked, Do you have family in town? He nodded. My sister, she teaches middle school. My mom? She's out in Dakar. That's not far. Hesme led far enough to make excuses, close enough to run out of. Then he laughed, and it felt good, really. Good. We drove back in silence again. But it was different now. Like the silence was a conversation we were both a part of. As we pulled up to the house, I didn't reach for the door. I sat there, hands in my lap. Jerome, I said softly, Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if one moment had gone differently? He turned to me, the engine still running all the time, he said. But I don't think those moments are about changing everything. Sometimes they're about waking us up to what we've stopped noticing, that stayed with me long after. He left Thanksgiving, came and went in a blur of cranberry sauce and carefully timed conversations. Richard flew in late that morning, golf bag slung over his shoulder like some kind of emotional armor. He kissed my cheek and asked what time dinner was. No apology, no explanation. We had friends over at neighbors. The grandkids called, and the turkey was a little dry. Richard fell asleep on the couch halfway through the football game, and I felt like I was watching my own life from outside the window. The next day, I called Jerome. "I don't need a ride," I said. "I just wondered if you were free." For coffee, there was a pause. "I am." He said we met at a quiet little place off Maplewood. The kind with mismatched mugs and music that sounded like something from my college days. He was already seated when I walked in, a book in one hand and a steaming cup in front of him. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said as I sat down. Neither did I. I admitted we talked for nearly 2 hours, about music, yes, but also about loss and resilience, and the quiet way life shifts under your feet when you aren't looking. He listened the way most people don't, anymore not. Waiting to talk, not offering solutions, just listening. I realized somewhere between the third sip and the second refill that it wasn't about Jerome at all. It was about May. I had spent so many years tending to everyone else, my husband, my children, my garden, my calendar that I had forgotten, the sound of my own thoughts forgotten, what it meant to feel. Alive when we stepped outside, the sky had cleared, the pavement glistened, and the air smelled like wet leaves. And second chances, Jerome walked me to my car. "Thank you," I said, for listening, for not rushing. This, his eyes met mine. "Steady, warm, some things shouldn't be rushed," he said. "Especially when they matter." I sat in my car for a long time. After he left, watching the wind chase leaps across the parking lot. Something was changing, not in some scandalous, dramatic way, but in the quiet corner of my heart that had long since gone exultant, and I was ready to listen to it again. It's funny how we live in the same house, share the same last name, sleep in the same bed, and still feel like strangers. Richard had been home for nearly 2 weeks, and we were moving around each other like furniture, functional, present, but never truly touching. He'd leave early for the club, come home late, and ask if I'd seen where he left his cufflinks. I'd nod or point, and that would be the extent of it. There wasn't anger between us, no shouting, just silence, and not the comfortable kind. I started spending more time outside, walking the trail behind the house, breathing in the crisp December air, watching squirrels race like children across the fence line. There was a stillness in winter that matched what I felt inside. One afternoon, I passed the bench near the creek, the one Richard had installed years ago, but never once Satan. I brushed off the frost with my gloved hand and sat down, curling into my coat like a shell. That's when my phone buzzed, a message from Jerome. "Hope the cold's being kind to you. Today I drove by the lake and thought of you. Felt like a quiet kind of day." It was simple, thoughtful, and it warmed me more than the scarf around my neck. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure how. Instead, I stared at that message, wondering how something so small could feel so significant. That evening, Richard came home with a bottle of wine and told me we'd been invited to the Donnies' Christmas party. I hadn't seen the Donnies in over a year. Should be nice. He said might be good for you to get out more. I raised an eyebrow. "You say that like I've been hiding under the porch." He looked confused. "I just meant, you've seemed a little distant lately." I wanted to laugh, distant. I wanted to ask him where he'd been when our son lost his job, or when I spent 3 nights crying quietly in the bathroom because I couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. But I didn't say any of that. Just nodded. "Sure, let's go." The party was fine. The food was oversalted and underseasoned. The small talk was predictable. Grandkids, hip replacements, retirement, homes in Arizona. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, and then I saw Jerome. He was there as a chauffeur, parked at the curb, waiting for one of the guests. I hadn't expected it. He hadn't mentioned it. Our eyes met through the window. He dipped his head slightly, acknowledging me, but nothing. More, my heart fluttered in my chest. Something between surprise and something couldn't quite name. I excused myself, stepped outside, pretending to take a phone call. He was standing by the car, hands in his coat pockets, face lifted toward the night sky. "Cold evening," I said, softly as I approached. He turned, smiled gently. "It's the kind Of cold that wakes you up, we stood there in the quiet, a whoosh between us that said more than words. You look beautiful tonight. He said. I felt a blush rise in my cheeks. You always say that. That's because it's always true. I looked down at my heels, suddenly aware of how silly they felt out here and there. All world, this all feels like a dream. Sometimes he stepped a little closer. Not too close, just enough. Then I hope it's the kind you don't want to wake up from. That moment. Stretched like taffy, sweet, slow, and impossibly tender. And then a door opened behind us, and voices spilled out, and the spell broke. I stepped back, adjusting my coat. I should get back, he nodded, but his eyes lingered back inside. I found Richard talking about interest rates with a man I barely recognized. He didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't notice I was gone at all. Later that night, after we got home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, washing off the carefully painted version of myself, lipstick, blush, mascara, one by one gone. And when I looked up again, I saw me, just me, lines, gray hair, the softened skin, around my jawline. But also something I hadn't seen in a long time, a flicker of light in my eyes, something alive. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote in my journal, I don't know what this is, but no, it feels like truth, and truth, however inconvenient, is worth listening to. I didn't hear from Jerome for a few days. It was the holidays, and he was probably busy, or maybe he was giving me space. Either way, I thought about him more than I meant to. Christmas morning came quietly. Richard handed me a small box with a watch inside, expensive, elegant, impersonal. I thanked him. He nodded. Then he turned on the news later that afternoon. I walked out to the garden. Everything was brown and brittle, but the air was full of potential of what could be. I called Jerome. I was just thinking about you, he said when he answered. We didn't make plans. We didn't need to. Some connections don't need appointments. They just need space to breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't restlessness. It was awakening. The days between Christmas and New Year's always feel suspended in time. There's a strange stillness that comes with the end of one year and the beginning of another, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to change. I didn't know what to expect when I saw Jerome. Again, I thought about him. Yes, more than I should have, but I told myself it was a passing phase, a temporary connection, something that filled a hole I didn't even know was there. But life doesn't work like that, does it? You can't push away the things that matter. They find you. On the second morning of the new year, the phone rang. It was Jerome. He said, his voice low, almost tentative. I need to tell you something. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what I was bracing for. You're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question, but I hoped I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he said, no, I'm not leaving. But I think you need to hear this from me, not anyone else. Go on. I whispered, my hands suddenly cold. I was standing by the window again, looking out at the barren garden, the stillness of the world outside, reflecting my own quiet turmoil. I've been thinking about about what happened that night, and I can't ignore it anymore. I care about you, Elaine, more than I should. His words fell between us like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew about myself, about us. I wasn't sure what to say, or if I even had a right to say anything at all. I'd spent years making my peace with the way things were, with the silence, the absence, the quiet spaces that Richard and I had become so good at filling with nothing. And now this, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But I was ready to listen. I care about you too, I said, my voice trembling a little, but I don't know what to do with that. What does it mean? Jerome, what does any of it mean? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breath, steady and slow. It mean, she said, his voice warm and sure, that I'm not the person you've built your life around. But maybe, just maybe, I can help you remember who you are. A soft laugh escaped me, one of disbelief, but also relief, the kind of laugh you give when you realize you've been holding your breath for too long. I don't even know who I am anymore, I said, my throat tight. You're someone who's been waiting to wake up. He replied. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. There was no grand revelation, no sudden moment of clarity, just the quiet recognition that sometimes the things we need don't come with bells and whistles. Sometimes they come in whispers and small, gentle realizations that lead us back to ourselves. Come meet me for coffee. Asked after a long pause. I'd glanced at the clock. It was a Tuesday morning, the world was still, and for the first time in a long time I felt present. I'd like that, I said. The cafe where we met was small, an old building with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, a place that had been around longer than either of us. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee grounds. I ordered my usual black coffee with a dash of cream, and he handed me a cup of something steaming and spicy, a little too sweet for my taste. But it made me smile. Anyway, we didn't talk much at first. We just sat there side by side, letting the silence fill the spaces between us. Eventually, I asked, "What do we do now?" He looked at me, his expression soft and thoughtful. "We figure it out together. Or apart, but we stop pretending we don't feel this. We stop pretending we don't need this." It was a quiet confession, one that didn't demand anything from me, just cognition that something had shifted. I don't know if I'm ready for anything. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I've spent so many years convincing myself that I don't need anything more, that I'm fine. Hesmeld, gently reaching across the table to place his hand over mine. You are fine, Elaine. But maybe you're ready for something different, something more. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. This touch was enough. I felt it settle into my bones, soft, steady. Sure, we sat there for a long time, enough that the early morning crowd thinned out and the light from the windows shifted from gray to gold. When we stood to leave, he hugged me. Not the kind of hug that feels like goodbye, but the kind that feels like hello. Take care of yourself, Elaine, he said quietly, holding me a moment longer than necessary. I will, I whispered. The drive back home felt different. The car, the streets, even the house. It all felt new, as if the world had shifted ever so slightly on its axis. Richard was home when I walked in. He looked up from his paper and offered his usual smile. How was your day? Good, I said, my voice steady. But something else lingered behind the words. Good, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Then he went back to reading us. If everything were just the same, I didn't know what the future held. He didn't know what would become of Jerome, or of me, or of Richard. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I could see the quiet potential in the spaces between the moments. I could feel the weight of what I had learned about myself, about the things I had hidden, about the way life could surprise you when you let it, and that was enough.